Hello everyone and welcome to Smart World with CNBC. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans Smart World avec CNBC. Je suis ravie de vous retrouver pour ce format 100% hybride. At the top of this program, Elon Musk crée le débat autour des tests antigéniques, contrôlés 2 fois positifs et 2 fois négatifs dans la même journée. Il met en cause une campagne de dépistage peu fiable. Joe Biden et Donald Trump annoncent simultanément leur plan national de vaccination. Joe Biden promet un vaccin gratuit pour tous. Donald Trump, lui, souhaite punir New York qui aurait mal géré la propagation du virus. La vague bleue aux élections américaines inquiète les PDG de l'industrie pétrolière. Joe Biden affirme vouloir faire sortir progressivement les États-Unis des énergies fossiles. Welcome to Smart World with CNBC. C'est parti, let's go. La polémique autour de la fiabilité des tests relancés. Cette fois-ci, par Elon Musk, le patron de Tesla réalise 4 tests antigéniques à la suite. 2 ont été négatifs et 2 autres positifs. Le patron de Tesla s'interroge sur la fiabilité des tests. Elon Musk raises questions about accuracy of COVID-19 tests.
What Elon Musk said he used was what's known as an antigen test, one of these rapid tests that can return results in as little as 15 minutes. And they do come with the risk of false positives and false negatives, being told you've either got COVID when you don't or that you're free and clear when you're actually not. And the FDA cautions about this, in particular, saying if people suspected of having COVID get a negative test, they should take another test to confirm the result. Now, there's another kind of test to find active infection called molecular or PCR tests. Now, those are considered much more accurate, but the drawback is they typically take a lot longer to provide results, days or even weeks when testing systems are overwhelmed. And there's evidence, of course, that that is starting to happen now as cases surge so much in the U.S. Now, a lot of people ask about the deep nasal swabs versus the shallow ones versus saliva tests. Those are all just different methods of collecting the samples, and they've all been proven to work. So what kind of test should you get? Well, Harvard testing expert Dr. Michael Minna says if you're sick, a PCR test is better. But you can also take an antigen test, and if you get a surprising result, you should take a different test, not the same one again, to confirm it. He says if used on a massive scale, rapid antigen tests could help curb the pandemic, but there has to be a strategy for using them.
We're not using them efficiently in this country. Even the tests that are out there, they're being used in a haphazard, inefficient fashion when they could be being used in a very coordinated fashion in a strategic way to actually be useful to curb this epidemic.
And he's hopeful that the Biden administration will do it differently.
Les tests antigéniques donnent un résultat en une quinzaine de minutes et ne nécessitent pas d'analyse en laboratoire. L'entreprise Becton Dickinson avait déjà ouvert une enquête sur ces tests après plusieurs alertes de faux positifs aux États-Unis. L'urgence de la situation sanitaire pousse les dirigeants américains à agir dès maintenant, alors que Donald Trump continue de mettre en place son propre plan de vaccination à l'échelle nationale. L'équipe de Joe Biden publie également le sien. The Biden team is developing its own vaccine distribution plans.
Well, Shep, the doctors advising the president-elect shared good news and bad news today. The good news was on vaccines and therapeutics. The bad news was on the sheer statistics of this virus, the record daily case count, the rising deaths, the hospitals at surge capacity, and the protective gear in short supply. But even despite this acceleration, 2 Biden advisors today tempered expectations for a national lockdown after a third advisor suggested something to that ilk earlier this week. Today, in separate interviews, doctors Vivek Murthy and Celine Gounder advocated targeted and nuanced approaches for business closures as this community spread worsens. The transition is working behind the scenes to prepare itself for this vaccine to come on the market, which could dovetail with the inauguration timeline. Pfizer is briefing both the incoming and outgoing administrations, and I've learned that the Biden team is talking with CVS and Walgreens about distribution and has been doing so for several months, even preceding the election. Even so, Biden's senior advisor Jen Psaki told reporters today that the lack of classified information, which, let's remind everyone, the discussions by the coronavirus task force in the Situation Room, they're classified. Psaki said the lack of that information for their team is hampering the effort.
you need real-time information to deal with crises of the moment. So there are areas, so on the COVID front, like access to ongoing work on distribution plans, vaccine development, that engagement directly with the agencies would significantly help our preparations to govern.
A current member of the Trump administration's task force, Shep, tells me that they are planning to provide an on-ramp to Operation Warp Speed for the Biden administration, but that plan won't get underway until the General Services Administration makes an official call on the election.
La transition ne peut pas correctement commencer sans la GSA, l'administration des services généraux. Cette agence fédérale qui chapeaute les différents services de l'État ne souhaite pas donner son feu vert tant que l'équipe Biden n'a pas remporté le vote des grands électeurs du 14 décembre. Et l'élection de Joe Biden a fait trembler l'industrie du pétrole. Fin du soutien inconditionnel de Donald Trump, grand supporter des énergies fossiles. Occidental Petroleum CEO discusses what a Biden administration could mean for the oil industry.
I've really tried to avoid the news of the last week or so. It's been something I really don't want to hear much about. But I can tell you that the transition from the current administration that's been very, very supportive of the industry to Mr. Biden, who will become president in January, I think is going to be one that will surprise some people. I think that some of his comments around fracking and some of the concerns about how this might impact the industry, I think it's going to be, first of all, a bit mitigated by the fact that the Republicans will still, we expect, control the Senate. But I think Mr. Biden also has some knowledge of carbon capture. His staff is certainly aware of what that means for us and for the industry, for the world. I believe that the new regulations that he may implement are things that will be workable for us. I think it's a matter of it gets back to collaboration. I think that no matter who's in the White House, no matter which party controls the Senate and the House, it's really imperative for us as an industry to collaborate with them, with the regulators, and with people in our society to help people understand what fracking really is.
Virage à 180 degrés à la Maison-Blanche. Joe Biden inquiète le monde des hydrocarbures. Son programme de campagne prévoit au premier jour de son mandat de durcir les limites d'émissions de méthane des projets gaziers et pétroliers. Cette élection n'était pas seulement une victoire pour les démocrates, c'était aussi une réussite pour l'industrie du cannabis. La marijuana gagne du terrain dans certains États et surtout dans le New Jersey. Grow Generation CEO says New Jersey is a getaway to legal weed on the East Coast.
All right, so first, Darren, I want to ask you just philosophically. It looks like that when marijuana is on the ballot, when cannabis in any form is on, it always seems to win. So isn't it inevitable that our nations could embrace it?
I certainly think so, Jim. The election was a big victory for the cannabis industry and Grow Generation. It's invigorating to see cannabis initiatives pass in 5 states. The green sweep. 1/3 of Americans live in places where cannabis is legal for adults. The beginning of a huge paradigm shift. GrowGen is prepared to outfit new operators with everything they need for cultivation. We're excited about Arizona, a strong medical market, potential to become a $2 billion market with the addition of recreational cannabis, which is why we entered the state prior to the election.
All right.
New Jersey, another exciting market, Jim.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about. I mean, New Jersey is huge, right? And you also say in your documents, Pennsylvania and New York have to follow. It can't just be New Jersey, correct?
That is correct. Jersey is another exciting market, gateway to the Northeast. Scouting locations, expect to open doors in New Jersey this spring. We believe the rest of the East Coast will follow suit, legalized very soon. Pennsylvania, your home state, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Jim.
Wow. Okay, so you just made a gigantic acquisition November 2nd to acquire the Grow Biz. It's the 3rd largest chain of hydroponic garden centers. In the end, which is better, just continuing to buy others or doing what you're doing with New Jersey, where I imagine you got to do some greenfield building of stores?
Jim, we're doing both. We're opening stores in greenfielding in new markets. Oklahoma. You'll see us in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York. You'll see us buying stores in mature markets, like we're doing with the GrowBiz, the nation's third largest hydroponic chain. $50 million annual run rate. 4 gardening centers across Northern California, 1 in Oregon. 50 talented individuals, Jim, will bring us up to 400 grow pros who know everything there is to know about cultivating cannabis and organic produce.
67% des électeurs du New Jersey ont approuvé un amendement permettant aux personnes de 21 ans et plus de posséder et de consommer de la marijuana à des fins récréatives. Google a enregistré un pic de recherche sur la façon de rouler un joint à la suite du vote. Cette élection va-t-elle changer la donne pour ByteDance? La date limite des négociations TikTok était la semaine dernière, mais il semble que le département du commerce ne soit pas prêt à imposer l'interdiction du réseau social. ByteDance granted 15-day extension to divest TikTok.
The Treasury Department is putting out a statement at this hour saying that it is allowing an additional 15 days for TikTok and ByteDance to find a corporate structure to operate in the United States that satisfies national security concerns. So that essentially puts the deadline at the Friday after Thanksgiving for these companies to find a transaction that satisfies the concerns of those in the Trump administration. Remember, they had previously announced a deal with Oracle, but there were concerns that the ownership structure was not majority enough that it would allay some of those national security concerns. Earlier this week, we did see a notice from the Department of Commerce saying that it would not be moving forward with a ban on TikTok downloads in the United States pending further legal developments. And the Treasury statement makes clear that the commerce actions and the Treasury pursuit of some sort of deal are the result of separate executive orders, and that Commerce may take actions that Treasury takes separately. There's an August 6th and an August 14th executive order. So there's a lot to follow here, but I think the bottom line is that we have another 15 days for a potential TikTok deal to happen before that ban could potentially move forward.
TikTok a maintenant jusqu'au 27 novembre pour parvenir à un accord. Je vous le rappelle, sous la pression du gouvernement américain, Biden s'étant pourparlers pour un accord avec Walmart et Oracle pour transférer les actifs américains de TikTok dans une nouvelle entité. Et les réseaux sociaux étaient véritablement au cœur de cette élection. Après le blocage de plusieurs publications fausses de politiciens républicains en amont des élections, certains conservateurs souhaitent désormais se tourner vers une autre plateforme. Refuge de l'extrême droite, Parler en anglais, entend lutter contre le technofascisme. Let's see how social media company Parler may be able to compete with Twitter.
Good morning to you, Andrew. Well, in the wake of Twitter and Facebook placing warnings on some of the president's posts, conservative social media app Parler, and I'm going to call it Parler, surged to the top of the Apple and Google app stores in the past week. Sensor Tower estimates that Parler was downloaded over 2 million times across the U.S. App Store and Google Play the week after the election. That's more than 30 times higher than the prior week, with approximately 5.4 million installs total. Now, Parler doesn't release daily user numbers, but its downloads are still a fraction of Twitter's 36 million monetizable daily active users in the U.S. and Facebook's nearly 200 million across the U.S. and Canada. Now, Sensor Tower says it sees no indication that Twitter users are migrating to Parler. Actually, Twitter had a 54% increase in downloads the week after the election from the week prior to the election. Plus, Parler's had some glitches from the influx of users, and it's not entirely free speech. Parler's CEO saying there needs to be some limits after pornographic images were posted on the platform. And what happens on Parler doesn't just stay on Parler. A small-town police chief resigned after posting violent threats on the app. And perhaps most notable, though high-profile conservatives such as Ted Cruz joined Parler months ago, they actually haven't slowed down the amount that they're tweeting.
Cette plateforme qui se positionne comme une alternative à Twitter garantit à ses utilisateurs une liberté d'expression quasi totale, écrit la plateforme. La plateforme encore très peu connue il y a quelques semaines a désormais le vent en poupe. Parler serait le réseau social préféré de Donald Trump. Le président a d'ailleurs reconnu à moitié la victoire de Joe Biden hier, et ce pour la première fois mois depuis le jour du scrutin. Dans un tweet, Donald Trump écrit « Il a gagné parce que l'élection était truquée ». Le contexte sanitaire et l'exemple américain font ressurgir le débat du vote par correspondance. Certains demandent même un vote en ligne. Mais le risque de fraude provoque toujours des réticences. CNBC Tom Chitty explains why many cybersecurity experts are wary of voting via internet.
Elections in most major democracies use paper ballots, which require an army of people to count the votes. This laborious and time-consuming process often results in a delay in declaring a winner. If we can use the internet for important services such as healthcare and banking, why don't we vote online? The concept of internet voting first gained traction during the 2000 US presidential election, when crucial election results in Florida were disputed, leading to a recount and delay in declaring the outcome of the contest.
Just the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. How it could be given to one, taken back, now, oh, we're not sure again.
Problems included voters' confusion at the design of the ballot paper, as well as faulty punch card voting machines. At the time, internet adoption was rapidly gaining pace, and there were growing calls for it to replace America's aging election infrastructure. While 32 states in the US have experimented with some form of internet voting, this has been mostly limited to a small subset of voters, such as military personnel and overseas citizens. However, one country has embraced the use of technology in its elections. In 2005, Estonia became the first country in the world to hold nationwide elections using internet voting. Its system, known as iVoting, allows voters to cast their ballot from anywhere in the world with an internet connection. During a designated early voting period, the voter logs onto the system using an identification card or mobile ID to cast a ballot. To maintain secrecy, the voter's identity is removed from the ballot before it reaches the National Electoral Commission for counting, and voters change their vote as many times as they want before the advanced polling deadline, with each updated ballot automatically cancelling the last. On election day, voters may choose to override their online vote by casting a paper ballot at a polling station. According to the United Nations and the European Convention on Human Rights, voter secrecy is one of the many essential elements of a democracy. Votes also need to be accurate and verifiable to ensure that the system can be trusted. Voting in many early modern democracies took place openly, permitting swift counting and public verification, but also allowing electors to be bribed or bullied into favouring a certain candidate. Reformers across the globe lobbied for the adoption of secret ballots through the 19th and 20th centuries, in order to ensure that voters could make their choice free from the fear of reprisals. Although technological innovations have led some of the world's most populous democracies, including India, Brazil and the US, to use computerized vote counting or vote casting machines, these have generally been kept offline and haven't always delivered instantaneous results. Critics of online voting believe that cybersecurity remains a major concern and that current technologies are unable to ensure the integrity of elections. Malicious actors may be able to attack and undermine an election conducted online to their advantage, often undetected. An independent report on Estonia's iVoting system by cybersecurity experts in 2014 found staggering gaps in the system's architecture at the time, which left it open to cyber attacks from foreign powers. Besides being vulnerable to hacking, online elections can't be audited effectively, unlike physical ballots which leave a literal paper trail. While cyber attackers could potentially delete millions of ballots from their bedroom, stealing the same number of paper ballots would be much more difficult without someone noticing. The geographical distribution of polling stations and constituencies also distributes the risk, while securely printed and marked paper is hard to duplicate or alter. Votes can be checked and recounted by multiple people, and the counting process itself can be watched by many pairs of eyes. This is why several groups of computer scientists have argued against internet voting or said it should only be used in parallel with a paper system for verification. In 2015, online voting in the Australian state of New South Wales was paused following concerns there was a major vulnerability in an internet voting system used for an election that could have compromised 66,000 electronic votes. Although France adopted internet voting for certain expatriates in 2012, the scheme was halted 5 years later due to cybersecurity concerns. Blockchain technology has been touted as a potential solution to these fears, but cybersecurity experts remain unconvinced. Startup company Vote has trialled its blockchain technology in a few elections, including the 2018 general election in West Virginia, with mixed results. But this hasn't dampened interest in the feasibility of online elections in the US, especially during a pandemic. In February 2020, a district election in the Seattle area became the first to allow each of its 1.2 million eligible voters to cast a ballot through their smartphones. More than 94% of the ballots returned were completed electronically, and voter turnout almost doubled from the previous election. Since 2007, Estonia's iVoting system has seen a steady increase in the ballots cast over the internet for parliamentary elections. In 2019, there was a 40% increase in online votes from the previous poll. However, this hasn't led to an increase in voter turnout. 44% of Estonians now use iVoting, and according to the government, iVoting saves over 11,000 working days per election. A study also found that iVoting is 50% cheaper than traditional paper voting. But it's important to remember that there are still more than 3.5 billion people, nearly half of the global population, who are not yet connected to the internet. So online voting may not be possible in many countries for some time. An election is a uniquely difficult process to deliver under the pressure of high expectations, limited budgets, and a hard deadline. According to some, there is no technology yet available that can meet the challenges of delivering elections safely via the internet. Although many aspects of our lives have shifted online, it may be a while before we can vote there too.
La cybersécurité reste un enjeu majeur. Voter en ligne pourrait signifier que des pirates, y compris des pays étrangers tels que la Russie ou la Chine, pourraient interférer ou manipuler l'élection à leur avantage. Le vote en ligne est réservé à des cas de force majeure aux États-Unis. C'est le cas par exemple pour les militaires sur une base étrangère. Mais selon le MIT, plusieurs études de plateformes d'élection en ligne déjà existantes ont révélé de nombreuses failles de sécurité. Alors que les États-Unis dépassent les 10,8 millions de cas et 245 000 décès, Hollywood reprend doucement le travail. On note une hausse du nombre de productions en octobre, mais continuer la réalisation en temps de pandémie a un certain coût. CNBC has more.
And action.
Hollywood is back.
Our first wedding.
All of our weddings.
COVID shut down Days of Our Lives last March.
Rehearsing page 3.
But the show must go on, and production resumed in September.
It was tough in the beginning because we're accustomed to, as you are, just walking in the front door. And now we have to add about 15 to 20 minutes to stop and do the COVID testing and wait for those results to come back and then be ushered in and make sure we have our masks on.
From the top.
Besides all the testing, directors now work off stage, writers from home, and actors are barred from more than a few minutes in the makeup chair and mostly do their own.
And we can't rehearse like we used to. You said, hey, Deidre would say, Drake, come up to the dressing room. We'd sit there and we'd run lines. We don't do that anymore. We go to our dressing rooms and we're there. We don't move from our dressing rooms.
How much has this cost the production?
Executive producer Ken Corday is son of the soap's creators. Days has had plenty of crazy plot lines for over half a century, but maybe nothing matches 2020's reality.
The cost of doing business now for Days of Our Lives, as it will be for all of show business when they return or as they return, is somewhere between 10 and 15% more than it was pre-pandemic. It's onerous.
4, 3, there would be applause.
Over at the Kelly Clarkson Show, they pivoted quickly during the shutdown. Clarkson started hosting from her home in Montana, where there was iffy Wi-Fi.
I have Justin Timberlake and Anna Kendrick with me on Zoom, my first Zoom interview.
She returned 6 months later to a very different studio with a smaller virtual audience.
We had to do, I would say conservatively, 55 plans to get us back here.
Executive producer Alex Duda says everyone on set takes a COVID test every other day.
And at first, everyone was kind of standing, like afraid to talk and afraid to move. But then we just started working the problem. Like, how are we going to work with this audience? Or what's it going to look like when we start wheeling out vertical monitors?
We still have our audience here.
I would like to get back to a place where there's a live audience. I would like to get to a place where you can hug people, but I don't think that's going to happen soon.
Over at Days, they have special challenges like love scenes. Producers let the actors decide their level of intimacy.
I don't think there are two safer people in the country than you and me.
No, we take.
I never leave home. I never date.
And I don't know about you, but
no, yes, I do.
I'm doing yard work all the time, so.
Any plans for a COVID plot line?
Absolutely not. I think to keep days sacrosanct and be able to escape to that hour a day where you're not dealing with masks and shields and protocols and testing is a relief for the audience.
Like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives.
Now, for us to get on those sets, the crew and I each had to take 4 COVID tests. They're not messing around. They cannot afford to shut down production again. And even though everything takes longer now and it's a lot more complicated, Shep, folks are so grateful to have jobs.
Selon CNBC, le coût de la production télévisuelle est de 10 à 15% supérieur à celui d'avant la pandémie. Mais cette hausse des prix ne décourage pas. Au cours des dernières semaines, l'État de Californie a reçu environ 2500 demandes d'autorisation de tournage pour près de 2000 projets de cinéma et de télévision. Je vous parlais d'Elon Musk au début de ce journal. Eh bien, sa société SpaceX va emmener 4 astronautes vers l'ISS. Le premier décollage se fait attendre. Le lancement a été retardé d'une journée. Les conditions météorologiques défavorables seraient en cause. Let's hear more on historic SpaceX NASA launch postponed due to weather conditions.
NBC's Jay Gray live at Kennedy Space Center tonight. Jay, the weather, how's it looking?
Well, Shep, it's already causing problems. You know it's always the wild card during launches here at KSC. And it wasn't the weather here. The NASA astronauts and weather team had a 70% go forecast. Instead, it's along the launch path. There was concern about conditions really affecting a possible recovery if the astronauts had to abort during ascent.
Was an improvement. Rendezvous and docking of the first crew.
For now, history will have to wait. NASA making the call to scrub the Falcon 9 launch scheduled for Saturday evening due to, quote, onshore winds and recovery operations. The mission now pushed back 24 hours.
We'll continue to watch the weather and the vehicles, and we're looking forward to a good launch on Sunday.
When the SpaceX rocket does fly, it will signal a major change for the space agency. It's the first time 4 astronauts will be in the capsule during a NASA mission, the first manned spaceflight certified by the FAA, and the first operational mission as a part of NASA's Commercial Crew Program. In essence, a charter flight to the International Space Station on a rocket and in a capsule built by a private company. An historic trip that could launch a new wide-open era in space travel.
The ultimate goal is to have more resources to do things for which there is not yet a commercial marketplace, like go to the moon and on to Mars.
And for civilians to perhaps soon travel into low Earth orbit.
Once space tourism turns the corner, we think we'll see likely topping 100 operations a year.
But that can't happen until this operation takes flight. Yeah, and with the late scrub this afternoon, there's no chance of that really until Sunday evening. I have to tell you, the forecast right now looks very good, Shep, but you know how the weather can change here in Florida.
Initialement, le décollage de la mission Crew One était prévu pour le jour d'Halloween. L'agence spatiale américaine avait finalement repoussé le lancement pour laisser le temps à SpaceX de réaliser des tests supplémentaires de la fusée Falcon 9. Thank you all for being with us. Merci à tous d'avoir participé à ce format 100% hybride. See you very soon for the rest of international news.